Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Last week on Thursday, we had the latest drought monitor released to us here, and I was just kind of examining the map and how much it's changed here over much of this summer. And the drought across the western part of the United States that extends into the Canadian Prairie and then across the northern plains and upper Midwest of the United States is truly a unique view of drought in the U.S. And I was just thinking about the extent of the drought in the western United States. And so I used one of the tools that the drought monitor has. It's under the data tab where you can click time series. I went in and chose geographic regions and picked up the west region. And what I wanted to point out is that right now, when you look across the western United States, it is actually the greatest extent of area covered in the west. That's what's on the y-axis here. Greatest extent of area covered in the highest kind of two categories of drought on record. That'd be D3, D4 drought. So we're talking about severe to extreme, and then we also have a significant portion here that is in exceptional drought, which is the highest category. Now the drought monitor began in 2000, so over that 22-year or 21-year time period, again, that's the greatest extent that we've seen so far through this part of the year. Now, this is a great tool for you to go check out and kind of play around with individual states and individual regions. But just taking a look at it here, I wanted to also show you some of the satellite imagery from just yesterday. If you watch this animation as I show you here on Sunday, we're kind of rocking back and forth. In fact, let me move that color bar out of the way. I want you just to notice the extent of the wildfire in the west. Just incredible to see that. It's also quite neat. I'm just going to move it again. Take a look at the storms that were in parts of Kansas and Colorado. You can see the outflow building back to the west out of these storms here. But what I was just most fascinated by is as the southwestern monsoon kicks off this convection, you can see how the smoke is kind of forced to orbit around it in that clockwise fashion. And some of the smoke from these fires in parts of Oregon, Idaho, and Washington is just spreading here all the way across this part of the United States and coming clear into the midwestern part of the U.S. I zoomed in and just had a closer look at those fires in Oregon because as we kind of played this forward, just extensive fires here. And this was again Sunday afternoon. And what's interesting about this is you notice the white that shows up on top of these fires. Those are pyrocumulus clouds. It's a cumuliform cloud that forms on top of the heat of the fire and actually uses the ash and the soot and aerosols from the fire to serve as the nucleation point to produce cloud on top of that. Just an amazing thing to witness here. Now, seeing all of that, it also got me thinking a lot about how much our moisture's changed as of late. And so I'd like to show you this animation I created. What it does is it looks at that top 16 inches of soil moisture or the top 40 centimeters. And I'm playing this animation going back to April. And as you notice, what we saw throughout spring was extensive drought developing in the eastern Cornbelt and then the near permanent drought that we've had in the northern plains and upper Midwest. Then as we worked into June, a lot of moisture south that then moved across parts of the Midwest. But the place that really stayed anchored to the driest weather, as we can see as this stops out here on the 19th, has primarily just been this corridor in through here. At times we've been very wet in the southern plains and high plains. It's been wet in the lower Mississippi River Valley and of course in the mid-south, and that's extended to the east at times as well. And the drought conditions we have developed in the western part of the United States have had no relief given that it is the dry season in that area. So if we put all that together and just come back to our presentation here, I want to show you the net effect of this. First, smoke. What we've got here is looking at a forecast over the next couple of days here where we're expecting that western North American wildfire smoke to spread. So this just kind of started over and shows us through tonight, getting into tomorrow where we expect to see the total smoke kind of moving throughout the atmosphere. And from there, next, let's just kind of ask the question and try to answer it here as to why the atmosphere has been doing what it's doing. And what I want to show you is going back over the time period of the 17th of June all the way to the 17th of July. This composite map basically stitches together what we've seen in terms of pressure patterns. So in general, there's been higher atmospheric pressure here and higher atmospheric pressure here. And the net effect is that between that, so if the flow around these goes clockwise, so it's coming in like this, okay, so I'll try to put some arrows on it. You got flow coming in like that and flow coming in like that. In between is where it's been squeezed, and that's where the atmosphere is forced to have rising motion. And of course, we've had lower pressure in this vicinity. You can also see it in the wind field. So if the flow is coming around like this and around like that. It's in between where the near stationary boundaries sit, and that's what you're looking at here. It's kind of a composite wind vector map. Now, you notice that by just looking here at the last 30 days of precipitation. You can see how dry it has been north of that line. You can see where that boundary has been established here, and just the continual push of moisture coming out of the Gulf and out of the Atlantic. Now this only goes up to the 17th, and over the weekend we put in quite a bit more precipitation right into this area. And there were some storms that cascaded, especially early this morning, out of parts of Manitoba into, right here along the US border. I'll show you those in a few moments. But before I kind of put that all together, interesting consequence to all of this. Something I hadn't really thought about until last night. I was playing basketball with some buddies of mine. One of my good friends, Drew, was saying, it's been really cloudy for the last month. And he says, I wonder if that's had an impact on pollination. So I went and looked at it today, and I put this in my morning report, but I really just didn't realize that this area in through here where that stationary boundary has been parked, when we look at the cumulative downward solar flux, in other words, how much sunlight gets down to the plant canopy, we're missing, this is a substantial deviation from normal here in this area. Been very sunny on either side of it, and also in the Pacific Northwest, but a lot of cloud covering through here. So I'll be interested to hear what kind of impact that might possibly have on the crop, because there's been a lot of rain. I mean, we saw that this area in through here has had, I stopped the color bar at 5 inches of surplus. So we have some places in here that are upwards of 10 to 12 inches more than normal of rainfall. Now, I told you over the last couple of days, as you see here, we did bring in some rain into those drier places over the last 30 days, right here into this part of the Mid-South and lower Mississippi River Valley. And that is the effect of those storms kind of coming over that ridge. But the southwestern monsoon is quite strong, and what we're going to watch is the boundary that produced this precipitation over the weekend is now much farther to the south down here, and it's kicked off a lot of storms today. So one of my favorite resources, blitzertongue.org, I've showed it to you many times. Great website to go get live lightning data. And you can see we do have some storms right in through here, coming in between Minnesota and North Dakota. It's a little pocket of storms here that's coming out of Saskatchewan into Manitoba. But we're going to watch the storms pop later in the day here, running around the ridge that it's very typical of the southwest monsoon. And our stalled out frontal boundary here is just meeting all of that moisture return, and lots of storms there. So that kind of gets us into the near term here. So from there, take a look at what the winds are doing. This is really fascinating. Okay, we do have a couple of tropical systems to think about. This is Felicia and Guillermo, and they're both moving out into the Pacific. And overall, they're not going to have an impact on the United States. In the tropics over in the Atlantic, no major easterly waves to speak about. We have a dominant Bermuda high, and that is feeding in the moisture. But take a look at the boundary here. You notice on one side the flow is coming like this, and on the other side it is like that. You can actually see in the forecast, let's blow this up for you, how the storms throughout the day today have responded. See, as I kind of go back and forth, can you see how they orbit right there on that line? So a lot of scattered storms here coming off the moisture in the Gulf on the northern side of that boundary as well. By 8 o'clock tonight, a lot of storms kind of popping up here in the Intermountain West. And then watch this. I'm going to step back here, and what I want you to see is that as the model's producing these storms right here through Idaho, watch what they eventually become. They go through parts of Montana overnight tonight, and then they come up here into Saskatchewan, and then into Manitoba, and then tomorrow as they run over the ridge, they then become storms that come out of the southern Canadian prairie and possibly get into, whoops, let's go back there, sorry about that, and then they possibly get into this area right in through here. So what you notice is they just run the ridge and produce a lot of scattered storms that come right over the top of that ridge into this area. And I think that's going to be a mainstay of this pattern as we look forward in the forecast. Because what I want to show you next is how the jet stream level winds are forecast to behave, at least over the next 10 days. And what you notice is the establishment of this ridge right in through this area that's kind of peaking through Montana into Saskatchewan. So the flow midweek has to go around that. What we end up getting are these ridge riding storms that come over the top of that, but quite a bit of heat underneath this ridge. Now I'll show you the rest of the precipitation pattern in a moment, but let's just take this out through Thursday into Friday, and actually see a low cutting through the Canadian prairie, but the ridge is still established here, and as we get then into the weekend, it reforms again. See that? So there is that ridge. Now I want to keep going out here through Monday and Tuesday of next week. And what you notice is by next Wednesday, the jet stream pattern has just kind of remained in a very similar configuration. The ridge is anchored right into this area. We're going to see what that does to precipitation and temperature in a few moments. And we're going to watch the flow come around it just like this. All right. Now, to put this kind of in a bit more scientific term as to why these ridge riding storms exist, I want to show you atmospheric vorticity. So this is cyclonic spin in the atmosphere. That's what's color shaded here. So you see disturbances like this right here, these little short waves that come through the flow, run over the top of the ridge, cascade down the back side here, and kick off those storms. And then you notice that there's a little disturbance, a little shortwave that cuts through parts of Alberta and Saskatchewan. And then that as well puts off a little piece right here, a little shortwave that comes through and kicks off another round of storms. And that just keeps happening. That's why when we talk about these ridge riding storm systems, they can be initiated from flow off of the Pacific. They can come around the ridge that's over the desert southwest, but they just follow the flow. And because we have a little bit of cyclonic vorticity in them, they just help tap into the heat of the day, plus the moisture that's in place, and just kick off storms that kind of run right into this area. Now, I can show you this from all sorts of different models, but they're all going to paint the same picture. Okay, here it is. Putting it all together, stalled out boundary, wet. Higher pressure in through here, drier. Southwestern monsoon, strong. Flow comes around it, and the ridge riders begin here and cascade through this part of the Great Lakes. And if I take this off here again, you see all of it over the next 7 days put together. Now, I'm going to also show you the actual model run. And by the way, the GFS and the European, they're going to have differences in precipitation amount. They always do. And it's going to be related to convection. But the pattern, the story is basically the same. And here's what it looks like. As we go through Monday into Tuesday, our stalled out boundary is here. Will you just watch with me each of the little pieces of those shortwaves that come over the top of the ridge and initiate storms in the downstream side? Ready? So here we go into Tuesday, Wednesday, getting into Thursday, and how about just taking that to Friday? So the first one came through. What did you notice? Scattered storms to the south, active southwestern monsoon. There's the shortwave at the end of the week that goes through Alberta, coming here into Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And then watch. We see Saturday, see it right there? Comes through the northern or upper Midwest into the Great Lakes and cuts down. And you're going to notice that into this area, there's just going to be daily scattered convection. Into this area, daily scattered convection. And coming over the top like this, ridge riders. It's who's in the middle that I get concerned about missing out on this. And then what we have to talk about is how the temperatures are going to respond accordingly. There will be isolated storms in here, but nothing organized overall when we think about that. All right? So next, why don't we just take a look at where this pattern goes as it gets into week 2. So I've got you out here with the GFS ensemble, and the European ensemble looks very similar to this. The flow of the jet stream is still doing something like that, with that ridge tucked away in this area. What I did notice in both models is that I go out there into next week, like Tuesday into Wednesday, is that both models tend to flatten the pattern, see this, and then put the ridge a little bit farther to the east. Now what's going to happen is if we bring in some higher pressure in the upper levels of the atmosphere here, what we could tend to get is those ridge riding events kind of coming a little bit farther to the south and cutting around just like this. And that seems to be where the pattern's going. So the GFS ensemble, since we just looked at it, looks something like this for the week 2 precipitation pattern. You notice that the wetter conditions run around the periphery of that and then cascade into the Ohio River Valley. Take note, we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, how the GFS model is very dry compared to normal from Texas all the way over to the southeast coast. And there are no tropical systems to be thought about right now. But my question is, how far to the north does that dryness extend? This is where the GFS currently has it. What about the European? I want to show it to you 2 ways. You see, the European model also has that same area, if you just look here, running around the northern edge of that ridge, showing up wetter. Notice that? So the high pressure cell is sitting here as we go into week 2. But the European does have wetter conditions in parts of Alabama, Georgia, through the Carolinas here. But again, no tropical systems in the near-term forecast. I'm going to show it to you one last way before we talk about the tropics, and that is just to pull up a map that shows over the next 15 days. So this is a 15-day outlook here from the European, what the probability is of getting another inch of rainfall. So a lot of what you've got right here is coming in the next few days. There's that active southwestern monsoon. There's our ridge riding events culminating here in the northeast. And the question is, this area and through here, the probabilities are quite low, and that extends into this part of the cotton belt here in Texas as well. So that's our view of the next 15 days looking at both models. Now I mentioned let's talk tropics. National Hurricane Center says nothing for the next 5 days. And just looking out there across the Atlantic, this was today, no areas of organized convection. In fact, I see a lot of dry and dusty air, and you can see it in this animation here, looking at how much dust we do have coming off this Saharan desert, and there's quite a bit in through this area. So any would-be tropical system would have to work against that. Now, vertical wind shear is quite low in this area, and that would be a favorable thing for making a lot of tropical cyclones. But what I want to watch most carefully is where the MJO is going. So it's over here in phase 5. That's north of Australia into Indonesia. And we see that it's heading into the Western Pacific and going back over toward Africa, phase 8, and eventually over to phase 1. And that's what's going to be important to watch. And here's why. When you take a look at the flow of the atmosphere, looking at where the atmosphere is kind of breathing, the air going up and down, what I want you to notice is that by the time we get out there to the end of July, see this little corner I'm painting here? Well, the blue-green color you see there represents rising motion over Africa. That would trigger more systems coming off the Sahel that then become African easterly waves in the Atlantic. That means that the beginning of August could be quite active for tropical cyclone activity. And we can see that maybe if I just come down here and show you the 11 to 15-day mean. You see it right there? That's better upward motion extending across the main development region. So I want us to be watching carefully when we get into the month of August for tropical cyclone development. Now, more on the long range in just a few moments, but first let's talk temperatures. Over the last 30 days, the western United States is setting all-time records. That's why you see the number 1 in all those climate reporting districts. For that 30-day time period, the 20th of last month through the 18th of this month, it is the warmest such 30-day time period that we have on record. Now, watching those temperatures today, we saw about 4 o'clock this afternoon Central Time there in parts of the eastern part of Montana, temperatures going up 107 degrees. And to be honest, that was really well forecast by the National Digital Forecast Database, which is what I like to show you. They predicted a high today of 108 in that area. Now watch this. This pattern we've been stuck in with the cooler weather to the south and the much above average temperatures extending out of the Pacific Northwest into the Canadian Prairie and here in the northern part of the United States, well, it continues throughout much of this week. That's Tuesday, getting into Wednesday and Thursday. The good news about this pattern for the Pacific Northwest is a break. See it? California, near normal. Cooler than normal here, even though it's still in the upper 80s, lower 90s. That's cooler than normal. The heat is with that ridge in this section of the country. Now that's Thursday's highs. Let's go out to Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. A lot of 90s, possibly cracking over to 100 degrees in the western Cornbelt at times. In fact, let's just step you back and show you. It might be Friday that could be the hottest day this week in this part, and we're not expecting storms, widespread storms. Isolated, yes, but nothing organized in this area during that time period. And as we stretch out there, let's shrink that up a bit. There you go. The latest update from the European model, day 5 through 10, expands the ridge. And you see the above average temperatures moving to the east with it. All right, so that is your near-term temperature forecast. Now, I want to come back to something I showed you at the beginning. You see, this was the last month from basically the 18th of June through the 17th of July. And as we now stretch this out and talk about our long-term forecast, we should ask ourselves, well, I'd like to show you the European model. The question is, how well did it do? Well, here you go. This is what the European model predicted for that time period. So again, this is what we got. This is what was predicted. Now you have to say that overall, for a month-long forecast by the model, it did an excellent job at picking up on a few things. Higher than normal precipitation here, also along the Gulf Coast, active southwestern monsoon, and the stark divide right there where if you go to the north and west of it, we had limited chances of precipitation. And that's where we did see the driest conditions. Now, there was some storms in here, but that was where, overall the patterns seemed to line up. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch you to the latest data, which just came out. And now we're going to look at, let's just stretch this out a little bit. How about we go and just look at the entirety of August? Now, what's not changing in this? What's not changing is the open Gulf transport. You still continue to see that there's some northward divide here where when you get to the north and west of that into the Canadian prairie, we have less favorable transport of moisture and lifting, and as a result, it shows up drier. I'd call it into question because we've been seeing ridge riders, right? But you notice that the model has to do something with that moisture, and it spreads it out here and provides above average precipitation. So this is what we're going to compare against in each forecast video, because this is what the outlook for August looks like at this point. Temperatures, it is just a continuation of what we've been seeing. Overall, the warmest weather is in the west. It is extending more frequently into the central and southern plains than it had been, but overall, that is it's very much an extension of what we had been seeing, just with a little bit farther southward extent of the warmer weather. Now, from here, what I'm going to finish with is talking about La Niña again. Now, we explained this, that the latest European model was focusing more on developing a moderate La Niña by the time we entered winter. So it's going to be developing this fall. We saw the corresponding precipitation pattern because of that. It returned more moisture to the Pacific Northwest sooner in fall. Okay, that would be a good thing to start building up snowpack early. But as we look out here at October, November, December, it did suggest that we would have a drier harvest in the midsection of the United States. Now, that's just a quick review. What I want to show you next is we've since gotten the new data from the National Multi-Model Ensemble, and it too is calling for that similar pattern, taking our ocean temperatures in the middle of the Pacific, that's what we're looking at here, back into that weak to moderate La Niña territory. And it shows up well when you look out again, October, November, December, same time period I showed you with the European, as having the cooler ocean temperatures here. Now, in last week's video, I discussed what this meant for rising motion here. Okay, well, let's do this correct for my physics teachers. Rising motion here, and what that could mean for sinking motion there. It could also lead to an active kind of second half of the hurricane season as well by diminishing wind shear in this area. But I want to keep going with this and just think about what it might mean by looking specifically at the October, November, December NMME, because just like the European, it was wetter here and possibly a drier harvest overall. So that's what I wanted to share with you in those updates. If you have 2 more seconds, just a quick word about Europe. We talked about it before, but the lows that came in through France and Germany, all of the flooding we've been hearing about in the news here is showing up now in the last 30 days maps, right? But I want you to see how dry we've been into this area. Well, over the weekend, the model runs did start to adjust to favor a storm track early this week right into this area, possibly increasing rainfall in Ukraine. That's where we're drawing here. But north and northwestern Ukraine and farther to the north of there continues to show drier. And I want to just keep a close eye on that because we could continue to stress crops in that area. Okay, a lot we covered today, but I appreciate your extra attention. I'll talk to you again on Thursday. Thank you.